Welcome to Politics PA's Voices of Reason. Today we're pleased to be joined by Pennsylvania Congressman Brendan Boyle. Boyle, a Democrat out of the 2nd Congressional District, represents Northeast Philadelphia. The ranking member of the House Budget Committee. He's been in Congress since 2015. Before that, he was the first Democrat elected to the 170th Legislative District in the Pennsylvania State House, and most importantly for our conversation today, a 1999 graduate of the University of Notre Dame, a 2000 Master's of Public Policy from Harvard University, neither school in line to get an automatic bid to the college football playoff. Representative Boyle, thanks so much for joining us today on Voices of Reason.
Yeah, great to be with you, Steve. And I appreciate the compliment that I'm considered, at least for today, a voice of reason. So hopefully I'll live up to that.
We're talking college football today. You have gotten the attention of the college football world with your tweet, and I'll just quote it. Let me state this as clearly as I can. The Big Ten and SEC should be very, very careful about some of the decisions they are about to make because they appear hell-bent on ruining major college football. I think they need congressional hearings into their collusion. You certainly got the attention of college football leaders who are looking to make the move from a 12-team college football playoff this year to an expanded playoff next year. I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, so Steve, just to explain, especially to casual fans or people who might not be paying attention to this, the issue is not necessarily, as I know you understand, but for others' awareness, the issue that I take in so many sports fans or people who are just supporters of the various universities that make up Division One's football bowl subdivision (FBS), essentially about 135 universities or so, including several in our state, such as the University of Pittsburgh, Temple University, and of course Penn State. Um, they all compete in the same division in FBS. They have an opportunity now to go to what used to be a four-team, but now a 12-team college football playoff. I wouldn't love it if it expanded to 16, but that's not what I was taking issue with, and what so many others have taken issue with. What the Big Ten and SEC are proposing to do, at least as of last week, is to, for the first time ever, essentially break themselves, the roughly 34 or so member institutions in those two conferences, they would break away from the other 100 colleges and universities, and before the season begins, guarantee themselves 8 of the 16 spots. This would be unprecedented, and this would be the first sign of essentially a breakaway in major college sports. It would, and I'm not the first one to use this. A number of college football writers who really don't have a dog in this fight, Stuart Mandel, Pat Forty, and others, have said this would be rigging the system literally before the season begins, because it would be. It would be by definition rigging it and saying you're guaranteed a certain number of spots, regardless of what happens on the field. So that is the thing that I took issue with, and that, a wide variety of voices in and around college football have loudly spoken up about and against. Um, it- Let me, and I know this answer is probably going on longer than it should, but I do want to say something because I want people to understand, because I think a lot of folks might react to this and say, well, wait a minute. Why is a member of Congress even opining about this? This is sports. Focus on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, war in Ukraine, the reconciliation bill, et cetera, et cetera. Well, first, I can chew gum and walk at the same time. In the last few weeks, I have pulled three all-nighters on the House floor as the Budget Committee ranking member, the lead Democrat on the Budget Committee, basically leading the opposition to the reconciliation bill. I was able to do that and still take the 10 seconds to issue the tweet that I did in order to get the Big Ten and SEC's attention. So that's number one. These things are not mutually exclusive. Number two, as to why would a government official and a member of Congress even offer an opinion on these subjects? Well, first, anyone who follows my social media knows I'm a passionate Philly sports fan and passionate Notre Dame football fan. So I often will opine on sports and express my views. Um, but on a more serious point, this is a multi billion dollar industry. In fact, if you were to take the 10-year value of some recent TV contracts, literally over a $1 trillion industry. Point to me any other multi-billion dollar or trillion-dollar industry in which government doesn't have a role in regulating. So I think that in fact it is appropriate, especially if there's going to be real harm done to a wide swath of major colleges and universities, which, make no mistake about it, would be the impact of the Big Ten and NCC, essentially giving the Heisman to the rest of college athletics and separating themselves and actually enshrining that into their laws.
So as we record this on Monday, June 2nd, the Big Ten is still proposing, as you mentioned, four automatic bids for the Big Ten, four for the SEC, two for the ACC, two for the Big 12, and then that would leave one for the best highest ranked team of the group of five, leaving essentially one at-large bid remaining. And a school like your alma mater, Notre Dame, could only get that if they finish in the top 14. To those of us that have grown up watching college football, I agree. That just does not seem fair.
Yeah, so first, because I know that, and certainly when I did that tweet, there were a lot of new followers I had in Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee who were saying, "Wait a minute, this guy's a Notre Dame alum," and they would, they acted like they were Columbo figuring this out. It's in my bio. I mean, I'm not exactly hiding my Notre Dame sports allegiance, but sincerely, that's not the motivation here. Actually, Notre Dame's path is independent of how all of the other spots are allocated. For Notre Dame, theirs is fairly straightforward. Under the current 12-team system, if they're ranked in the top 12, they're guaranteed an at-large spot. If they're not ranked in the top 12, they don't get it. If that moves to 14 or 16 teams, then they would have to be ranked in either the top 14 or top 16. So if the SEC and Big Ten combine for 8 bids or 2 bids, it really doesn't matter in terms of their path. The schools that really have to be nervously watching this, frankly, are schools like Pitt and schools like Temple and the other 100 colleges and universities that are outside the Big Ten and SEC. Because, boy, besides the fact their second class status would now be established for the first time ever, this would really limit their ability to make the playoff, which means it would limit their ability to earn a pretty significant amount of revenue. I mean, take Pitt, for example. I've been to college football games at Pitt at what I still call Heinz Field. I think that name is maybe a little outdated now, but it's a great environment. I mean, I've been there for a couple of Notre Dame Pitt games, was completely sold out. A ton of great Pitt fans. They won a national championship, I think, back in the 70s or 80s. I know they've been ranked number one before. They would be seriously and adversely impacted if this were to come to pass, as well as all the other institutions that are in the ACC, the Big 12, and the other conferences that aren't the Big Ten and the SEC.
I know there's some discussion about if Congress would get involved in the discussions about something as inconsequential to some as a college football playoff, that you could see the Big Ten and the SEC essentially taking their ball and walking away. The breakaway that those of us that have followed college athletics for years have kind of expected to happen at some point. Money is the root of all evil here. Could this actually backfire in that respect?
Yeah, so that was the other kind of I'm not sure if it was implicit or explicit in my tweet. I have not been spending the last several years going to the Big Ten and the SEC and the other colleges and universities asking them to help me with something. They have been coming to me and to members of Congress saying, we need help. We need a new law that will clarify these new NIL rules and we can get into that in a minute. For those who might not be aware of what we mean by NIL, we need to clarify exactly what our legal relationship is with the players or student athletes. We need help in terms of this new regime, which is supposed to take effect literally in 30 days. For the first time ever, college student athletes will be getting paid by colleges and universities. Whether people agree with that, disagree with that, regardless, it's going to happen. That is as a result of litigation that is supposed to be settled as soon, perhaps, as this week. It's called the House settlement case. So there are these myriad legal and regulatory issues impacting all of the NCAA, but especially at its highest football playing level. And so as a result, a number of colleges and universities, actually all of them basically, and the major conferences have been coming to Congress asking us to pass legislation on these issues. So in my tweet and in other conversations, I have reminded them that if you're coming to Congress expecting help, and then you're turning around and rigging the system and trying to exclude most of the other colleges and universities, and doing so in a grotesquely, patently unfair way, don't be surprised if you find an unsympathetic audience in Congress.
That's an excellent point. I know they've come to Charlie Baker and other lobbyists have come with the open hat saying we need antitrust help. We need to be able to be treated like the NFL, be able to pull our ability to um, put out our bids for media rights
Right.
and that kind of stuff. And you're right. It just sounds like you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, bingo. I mean, you put that as simply and as succinctly as I will next time, because these are complex issues. But basically, people can figure out, hey, wait a minute, you're really trying to have it both ways here, and you just can't do that.
You mentioned NIL, and as you said, for those who don't follow college football as ardently as we do, NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. It started out as a policy where a student that participates in athletics, I say that because I'm not a big fan of the phrase student athlete, a student that participates in athletics is able to maintain their rights to how their image is used, is turned into pay for play, and now, with the House versus NCAA settlement hanging in the balance with the Ninth Circuit Court, as you said, is pretty much students are going to be able to be paid for the first time. When you look across the requests for help from Congress, certainly, but you look at 50 state governments, what they're going to do in Alabama for NIL is much different than what they're going to do in Ohio, different than they're going to do in Michigan. And Pennsylvania really hasn't come forward with a plan for how to deal with this. How can we balance what the state wants versus what the federal government says we need to do?
Yeah, and this is where I have to say I'm pretty sympathetic to the colleges and universities. There isn't one conference in the NCAA that just exists for colleges and universities in one state.
Right.
And so you can see how you actually really need federal legislation in order to get everyone playing by the same rules of the road. So, for a recent example, the state of Tennessee, their state legislature wanting to give a leg up, obviously, to the University of Tennessee, maybe also to Vanderbilt, which probably needs more than one leg up, but at least to the Tennessee Vols. They passed a law that actually would advantage and make certain things illegal. It gets kind of complex, but basically would help the Tennessee Vols and any Tennessee college or university get a little bit of a leg up in terms of the NIL world. You can easily see a number of other states emulating that, and suddenly you would have just a hodgepodge of different. How are you a conference? Let's say take the ACC.
Mhm.
How are you a conference and you're attempting to have everyone compete by the same rules, and then you have to follow the state rules that range from California to Massachusetts to Florida to Pennsylvania, etc. It cries out for a federal solution. So that's actually, I have to say, there and some other issues. I do have some sympathy with the colleges and universities looking for a federal response. I would also say it's really hard. This is not an inherently conservative or liberal or Democratic or Republican issue because I think even casual fans listening to this could already tell, boy, this gets really complicated really quickly and touches on a lot of different aspects of federal law.
Where does Title IX come into this as well? We hear that a
You're
lot.
asking.
You just almost were alluding to that. Everyone will come out and say college football, men's basketball are the ones that are driving most of the revenue. Shouldn't they keep it? Well, Title IX is a federal law that talks about 50-50. How's that all play into all this?
So you touched on one of the examples I tend to use. And so just for people I have an idea about, and this is, back of the envelope math, but I think is not too far off. Roughly 85% of all of the revenue coming from going into colleges and universities for sports comes from one entity, college football. It is amazing how much college football dwarfs even college basketball and the men's basketball tournament, which is very lucrative. That, by the way, would be the other approximately 10 to 12% of revenue going to college sports. Men's basketball, everything else is in that 5% or less bucket. So then, how do you deal with the equity issues where Title IX, you're supposed to have an equal number of male athletes and female athletes? By definition, the 100 or so players on the football team are all male. Does that mean now you're scrapping a bunch of other men's sports that were sometimes referred to as the non-revenue sports? Also, if we're going to get into fairness, geez, if 85% of the revenue is being brought in by one team and they're seeing money that they earned going out to pay other players, I can make an equity argument actually on both sides of that. These issues actually do get very complicated very quickly, and you can see why a number of us who have been working with the colleges and universities for going back 4 years now, ever since the first Supreme Court case ruled on NIL. It was a unanimous decision, by the way, on the court, which is what gave the green light to NIL to come into existence in the first place. But it just ended up independent of the NIL Supreme Court decision. You had other cases that were being brought by current and former players that just led to the point of, hey, wait a minute, the old system of amateurism is no longer going to fly legally, and we need some other legislative or regulatory framework to deal with all of this.
As you mentioned, the House settlement talks about allowing colleges and universities to pay up to $22 million to their athletes in the course of a year. You look at, as you mentioned, the NCAA. The NCAA actually has one revenue source. That's the basketball media contract. And for the 60 or 70 small Division III schools in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, your Carnegie Mellons, your Franklin and Marshalls, your Swarthmores, they get 3.18%, which works out to about $35 million a year. So you can just see the disparity right now. So for me, and certainly for you, it's just not your father's college athletics anymore, is it?
Yeah, and that's where I mean, some of these changes I like, some of these changes I wish had never happened, but the reality of the world in which we're living in 2025 and beyond. And you can see why coming up with, a legal and regulatory scheme that applies to the just talking about within our state, the Penn States of the world and Pitts and Temples, but also the Holy Family Universities
Right.
and the Swarthmores, as you mentioned, and all of the St. Francis of PA. Although I always joke come NCAA tournament time, St. Francis was not of Pennsylvania, but the university is here and sometimes makes the NCAA men's tournament. Boy, coming up with a again a legal and regulatory scheme that is in the best interest of these colleges and universities, best interest of the students who attend the institutions, best interest of the students who are also athletes and play for these sports teams and spend an awful lot of time devoted to playing on these sports teams. And then, of course, the fans who, let's face it, their eyeballs, especially in college football and men's basketball tournament, is what is fueling a lot of these revenue dollars that are causing some of these issues.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it almost sounds like the end game is for the powers that be to do something that's in the best interest of the game versus the best interest of their conference and their membership.
Well, if you can make one generalization of what I'm looking out for, and I'm not the only one, by the way. I mean, I've been privately talking and texting with some colleagues of mine, actually more than half of whom are on the other side of the aisle, interestingly. Um, I want what is in the best interest for the game, the students, the fans, the fans whose passion for all of this is what has led to all of this money. Any conference or conferences who are going to act in a completely selfish, monopolistic way or duopolistic way, um, that is where I draw the line and have a real problem with. And the ramifications of that will not just be for 2026, they will be for many years and decades to come.
We've had a good conversation with Representative Brendan Boyle out of Northeast Philadelphia. I would be remiss on a Politics PA podcast not to ask you something about your side gig in Washington with the reconciliation bill and the cuts to Medicaid. You've been very vocal on social media about that as well. Do you see changes coming to the reconciliation bill in the Senate, and then hopefully we'll come back to the House where maybe it can be massaged better? Or what are your thoughts there?
So the bottom line is, if the House bill becomes law exactly as written, at least 13.7 million Americans will lose their health care. The majority of that comes from the cuts to Medicaid, but also a sizable minority of that comes from two other specific cuts that are being made to the Affordable Care Act. So you have roughly 7.7 million people losing their health care who are on Medicaid, another 6 million who would lose their health care coverage who are currently on the ACA exchanges. You combine that, and that's where the Congressional Budget Office arrived at their figure of 13.7 million Americans. It will have unbelievable ramifications for every state, but actually more so in Pennsylvania than most other states, given the demographics of our state. My congressional district, 44% of my constituents are on Medicaid. And lest anyone think that this is only an urban issue, actually take a look at Fayette County. Take a look at a number of smaller rural counties in Pennsylvania. They will also feel a disproportionately high and negative impact from these Medicaid cuts if they become law. Now, in terms of the raw politics of what will happen next, I tend to think Senate Republicans will pass something. They have a nice cushion there. You know, they can lose three Republican no votes and still pass it. They kind of certainly on a percentage basis have a lot more of a cushion in the Senate than House Republicans have. Mike Johnson will remind you of that every minute of every hour, by the way, and probably remind John Thune of that as well. Um, the interesting thing in my mind is at the moment there are two sources of heartburn for Senate Republicans, but also for yours truly. One is the size of the enormous cuts to healthcare, which would be by far, by the way, the biggest loss of healthcare coverage in American history. I have pointed this out before that not even in the Great Depression did you see more than 13 million Americans lose their healthcare. But then there's another source of heartburn, and that is as big as the cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act are, which in total are about $1 trillion, as big as the cuts are to SNAP, which nutrition assistance, they would be the largest cuts in American history. Other cuts to education programs, all told, that's about $1.5 trillion. However, the size of the tax cuts is over $5 trillion. So, how do they propose to pay for that three and a half or so $1 trillion deficit? They don't. It would be more money added to our nation's deficit and more money put on our national credit card, the national debt. So there are a number of us, including a few Senate Republicans, who have said, wait a minute, we fear, and this should be a legitimate bipartisan concern. There is a real fear that at some point, if we keep going on the path we go are going on now, we will reach a debt crisis. A debt crisis would be if, right now the 10-year treasury bond is about 4.5%. If suddenly we start seeing that going north of 5 or reaching 6, that would be a sign that the international markets, the investors internationally who are buying our debt, reach the point they say, hey, wait a minute, you're now over debt being over 100% of your GDP with no apparent plan to pay that down. And in fact, the projections show into the next decade it would get significantly worse. I very much fear, and I've been talking to a number of analysts, including some ordinarily conservative leaning folks on Wall Street, who are both publicly and privately saying, we actually cannot issue this amount of new debt because there is pretty soft demand for it. So I'm glad to see and heartened to see there are apparently a number of Senate Republicans who I generally would not agree with on a number of issues who are taking issue with the bill in terms of its impact on deficit and debt. So for those two reasons, the healthcare cuts as well as the increase in deficit and debt, I could see this legislation changing in some way and then coming back to the House.
We'll get you out of here on this question. We found out through our conversations that the two of us have something in common. Uh, I currently do play-by-play for football for Franklin Marshall College. Representative Boyle did play-by-play as a student at the University of Notre Dame. So I wanted to ask you, what's your fondest memory of those days being the play-by-play guy? And could you share your touchdown call with us?
Well, I'm a little rusty out of practice. Although I will occasionally, sometimes during a game, find myself hitting mute and doing a little bit of the play-by-play, something that I did as a kid when I was attempting to imitate Harry Callis. But yeah, I had 3 years as a sportscaster on 640 WVFI AM,
Hmm.
and then did 2 years of Notre Dame basketball. Was just a lot of fun. I like to joke my career peaked very early and it's been downhill ever since. But just a wonderful experience. I love sports. I mean, pro and college, but I think there's something special and very uniquely American about college sports. If you ever are abroad, and I do a lot of work, maybe we'll talk about some other time. But I do a lot of work in the NATO Parliament and on issues impacting NATO. If I'm talking to my European colleagues who really understand pro sports and they have their own equivalent of pro sports, they have no equivalent of college sports. This is a uniquely American angle on sports that to most foreigners just does not translate. I think is an important part of Americana. The idea that, a place that would not have a pro sports team like Happy Valley, Pennsylvania, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, can really all rally around the state university or the college in their little town and be very passionate, feel like a certain amount of even ownership over the team because it is your college or university. I think that is truly special, and I would say that's part of what fuels my passion for college sports.
Now, is your daughter involved in sports, and does she have a lot of shirts like this laying around the house? See if I get that on the camera correctly. You play like a champion today shirt.
That
How many of
is
these? How many of these do you have laying around the house?
that is excellent, by the way. And I every year for the last few years have my wife and I have taken our daughter out to campus at Notre Dame, make a pilgrimage, and I joke that it is my own little private project, indoctrination, and so she does love it out there. She does have some Notre Dame paraphernalia. She does not have that specific shirt, by the way. So I will have to offline. You'll have to let me know where you got it. I think that's great. I mean, it's just, and this past college football season, which we talked about earlier, the fact that Notre Dame and Penn State were both playing in the national semifinals, really for both of them the first time in 40 years. It reminds me of what I was like when I was a kid, when Penn State was competing for a national championship and Notre Dame was competing for a national championship. So there's so many things actually in the sport that are currently going well and that I like, and so we just have to make sure that we don't allow some folks to screw it up.
Our thanks to Representative Brendan Boyle, Pennsylvania's 2nd Congressional District, for taking time to join us to talk about a lot of things today, not only college football, but politics in Washington. Representative Boyle, thanks so much for joining us today on Voices of Reason.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.